Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 6 of the Learn How to Study Abroad in America mini-series. For today's video, we are going to be talking about how you begin to select a college or university here in America in terms of how do you apply, how many you should apply to. I'm going to walk you through some of the common steps that we Americans actually take. And so we have talked about private universities, we've talked about public universities, community colleges, private colleges. You have all this information. How do you actually translate that into making a list of where you want to apply and how you should start? So we're going to talk about that today so that you get an idea of where to begin and what to get started with. Let's begin now. So as we move into day 6 of our series, we are starting to look at where you decide to apply, how you decide to apply to schools here in the US. And we're going to talk specifically about some of the tried and true ways that us Americans decide how we're going to apply to schools and how you might be able to use that particular way of thinking for yourself as well as an international student. But I definitely wanted to just begin by starting here because this is so important. This is a huge part of the college and university decision-making process that I feel that sometimes a lot of students don't think about enough. You may think about it in some ways, particularly for some of the surface level things and maybe some of the things that people can see. So for example, some people may choose a school based on their religion. They may choose a school based on their particular skin color. In a lot of respects, they may choose it based on whatever major they want to do. But you need to just take it one or even two steps deeper and think truly, who are you? Because again, as you are going through, and especially as an international student, you are making a huge decision to decide to uproot your life for 3 to 4 years, maybe even longer if you're doing graduate school. Come to the US, you're looking to potentially decide maybe to stay for a while afterwards, wherever you were going to school. And so it is a huge commitment, not just financially, but overall as a person. And you need to think about who are you in this particular respect, because there's going to be a lot of things that you're going to face, not just, in terms of a bad way. Hopefully nothing that you are going to go through is going to be too difficult in that way as an international student. But you want to think to the core, who are you? What is important to you? So some of the things to consider could be everything from the climate. Are you someone who you like, let's say 300 days of sunshine? Well, then you probably are not going to want to go to a place like Alaska because a lot of times it is dark there all the time. There are some times where it is sunny even when it's supposed to be dark technically, but it's not going to be that type of place where you're going to just have all this abundant sunshine. Are you someone who you potentially want to have an opportunity to see lots of snow and lots of winter weather? Well, then a place like California, even though there are some parts where it does snow here and again, you are probably not going to get the best exposure to what you're looking for. Are you someone, let's say, ideologically, are you much more socially conservative? Maybe you come from a place like the Middle East where you are looking to come to a place that is similar to where you are. You probably are not going to find your people necessarily in Portland, Oregon, I'm sorry to say, but I mean, you could find some people that are like you, but it's not going to be the same as, let's say, going to the southern United States. So you have to just think about all these different things that make up who you are as a human being. Not to say that things like, let's say, your racial makeup or who you are as an athlete or different things like that are not important, but just thinking about your core values and what's going to be important. This is something that in the US we have discussions about when we're thinking about college and university as well. And the great thing about it is that since we have so many, as I've said before in other days of this series, this really is an opportunity to be able to decide what is going to work best for you, because there's so many different options for colleges and universities here, and there's something for everyone. So if you are super religious, if you are an atheist, if you are a vegan, if you are someone who is looking to get into special arts, if you are interested in being a special ed teacher, if you are someone who wants to have a Hindu program, there's something for everyone in this country at a particular college or university. And you just have to be able to take your time, think realistically, and dig through and decide, who am I? What am I looking for? Not just for the experience of actually being able to study. Are you someone who you don't want to be around people who are going to be partying all the time? Maybe a large state public school is not going to be great for you. As I mentioned in the second day of this series, when I was talking about public universities, that is one thing that they are known for. Not that partying doesn't happen at other schools, but that is something in particular that a lot of party schools also just happen to be public state schools. That may not be good for you. On the flip side of that, maybe you are someone, you want to join a sorority, you want to join a fraternity, you want to get involved in a lot of sports. Maybe a small private college is not going to work for you. Maybe you're someone who you are not even sure if you want to continue with the American college experience, but you want to try it out. Maybe a community college would be a first best step for you. There are so many community colleges around the country. Where do you actually want to go? So start thinking about these different concepts, these different ideas as you begin to move forward on this journey of deciding where to apply. It's going to be really important. So the next thing I want to stress for you is going to be choosing substance over name ID. Now, this is something that I harp on all the time. This was something that I did not really think about myself until I started applying for schools in the UK and spent time in the UK and understood specifically how it works in their culture. I know that a lot of European schools are also like this. I know that in some places in other parts of the world, like the Middle East, like different parts of Asia, that there tends to be a lot similar to here in the US, where people just tend to go for the name ID. So if they have not heard about it, whether it is going to be Stanford or Yale or UC Berkeley or UCLA or University of Notre Dame or whatever it is, those schools that have that sort of global name ID, that it's just kind of off of their radar. And I want to get people out of that. This is something that I've tried to be sort of really preachy in a way to a lot of American students about, because I feel that they sort of short circuit themselves in the way of just thinking that having a name on their resume is going to help them, as I've mentioned before. And I know that there are definitely some values to having that, but I have said before, and this reigns true, I feel like in the type of climate that we are in now, economically, it could be true within the next couple years, that back in 2008, there were kids from Yale standing in the unemployment line with kids from community college. So it doesn't guarantee that having that name on your resume is going to help you at all. A lot of people that have that name on their resume, a lot of people that go to these Ivy League colleges, they already have an advantage anyway because they may have connections. They could be a legacy. It's not always like that. But a lot of times when you're trying to think of it from that lens, you may not have that same background. And so they're using it in a different way, and it's a part of a different toolkit than what you may be using it for. So just thinking that because you have some name brand college or university on your resume and on your applications is going to help you in the future, that is not necessarily the case. The other thing about that as well is kind of going back to who are you? If you are just choosing a school based solely on the name ID and what you think you're going to be able to get out of it, that's going to be a lot less useful to you, because again, you may be going to a school where you're choosing it for the name ID, but the particular major or program that you want to go to is in a school 2 states away. And while it may not have as much name ID, it's going to be perfect for you and what you're trying to accomplish. So I always want students to definitely focus on that and focus on what's going to be right. Again, there are so many different factors that play into the way that you should choose a school over just choosing the name ID. Of course, I think that if you have the test scores, if you have the grades, and you really want to try to apply to some of these more bold-faced named schools, that's going to be great as well. But don't just feel obligated to only choose those schools. Now, if you had a chance to download my quick look list, then you will see that I highlighted 100 colleges and universities throughout the U.S. It's linked below, that some of them you have heard of, some of them you've never heard of, but there's a lot of opportunity, and a lot of them, even though they are smaller, some of them are a little bit bigger, they have international students there. So if that's something that you're worried about, I know that a lot of students coming internationally, you're thinking, well, if I don't go to a Yale or a Stanford or a Harvard, I'm not going to meet other international students. That is not true. Every single college and university, or at least most of them in this country, have some presence of international students. People come from all over. You saw some of that when I was highlighting in day one when we talked about where students come from, but also as well, even if it is a smaller school, a lot of times you will have the ability to have more support, have more input. And so I definitely just want you to consider that. And this is something that I tell my American students as well. Part of the reason why I was mentioning that is because I know that when I went to the UK, I was surprised at how that was not the focus of sort of the way that students chose schools. Yeah, there were some students that applied to Oxford and Cambridge, but I found that a lot of them, they were applying if they were specifically looking at a particular major. So if they really wanted to go into the arts or into the literatures, that's how they chose it. Whereas if they were looking to do something else, they may apply to a different school that not a lot of people had heard of, but it wasn't sort of the same idea of romanticizing that if they didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge, that they were just less than. And that is something that in this country, we definitely have to overcome. We definitely are very prejudiced, whether people like to admit it or not, about number one, people going to college, even though nearly half of Americans don't go to college. We tend to only talk about it from a perspective of people going to college. And then in our culture, we're very judgmental about where someone went. That is unfortunately one of the first things people will ask you. I think that's very invasive, especially as someone who has lived abroad and been around people who they do not ask you very personal questions. People will ask you right away, first meeting you, where'd you go to college? Where did you do this? I don't mind answering that question. That doesn't bother me, but it is very invasive and people are very judgy about that. And so I don't want you to feel that you have to buy into that. You go wherever is going to work best for you. Forget what everyone else thinks. You know how I sort of roll with that. I don't really care when it comes to that. You do what works best for you and forget everyone else. So just keep that in mind. Now, in terms of the traditional college ranking system, it was kind of nice as I was going through doing my research. In the world that we live in now, so much has changed, unfortunately. But I was really excited to see that this is still around. So this particular system was around back when I was just applying to undergraduate schools back in the early 2000s. It was around when my parents were applying to schools back in the 80s. And so it has been around for a very long time. I can't even remember when it started, but I believe it was like in the 50s. So it's been around quite a long time and it's shifted a little bit. And there are some different terms depending on who you're talking to, but it tends to be the same three sort of rankings to a sense. So what you're going to find here in the US is as you're sort of going through and you are thinking about schools, it's going to be really important to put them into tiers. And this is how we have traditionally done it. Millions of kids have done this here in the US and a lot of international students have learned about this as well. So we tend to rank our schools that we are choosing, that we are interested in applying to into three different levels. So the first level is going to be safety schools. So safety schools are great because these are the ones that you know that you have probably about a 90 to almost 100% chance of getting into. A lot of students consider community colleges to be safety schools. A lot of students consider, depending on where they're coming from, maybe their state school is going to be their safety school. There are some kids, obviously, if they have outstanding test scores and grades and extracurriculars, maybe an Ivy League is one of their safety schools. You don't hear that as much, but there are some people that consider that. But a lot of people will say that, you know, for your safety school, these are the ones that you feel like maybe, again, 90 to 100% you could get in. You have the grades, you have the recommendations, you have all the things you're going to need to be able to get in. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a guarantee, but that you're going to be within the top level of people applying to be able to get in. You feel very comfortable that you can sort of live up to all they're asking for. Then you have your target schools. So with your target schools or your mid-range schools, these are going to be the schools that you are really interested in getting into, but there may be certain things that you may just have to bring up a little bit. So in a lot of ways, this is where the test scores come in. So a lot of American students, for example, struggle with this, where they may have outstanding grades, they may have outstanding recommendations, they may be star athletes, but their test scores are a little bit off. And so they feel like if they can work a little bit harder, bring up their SAT, ACT, or any other test that they have to take to get in, that's going to be able to level out and they have a chance to be able to reach their target schools. Now, a lot of these schools may be a little bit bigger, so it may be where they're saying that this is going to be their school that they're really interested in. It has a lot of what they want, but there may be some things that they may have to compromise on. So maybe they, like I'll use the athlete example for again, maybe it has a sport that they want, but it may not be in the location that they want. But they're like, well, I really want to go, let's say, study lacrosse and take lacrosse and do lacrosse while I'm in college. And they have an outstanding program here, but it's also in Michigan and I don't want to go to Michigan and be in deep winter for 6 months. You have to think about those things, but these are schools where you're you're like, yeah, I mean, I could see myself doing it if I really wanted to, because this is a target school for me. And I feel like I have, 75 to 80% chance of getting in. So absolutely, I definitely want to be able to do that. Last but not least, you have your reach or your dream schools. Now with reach or dream schools, it doesn't mean that it is just a reach or just a dream. You definitely can get into those schools, but it means that number one, it likely is going to put you at the most competitive level. So these are going to be schools, again, it's not a particular school. Everyone's school, dream school, reach school is not Yale. It's not Harvard. For some people, it could be a very small private college, but it just means that for whatever your private or dream school is, it means that it could potentially have everything that you want. That's why they call it a dream, right? At least in theory, no place has everything that you want, but that it could have, at least within your mind, when you are trying to pick out your schools, it has everything you want, as a program you want, it's in the location that you want, but it's probably going to be a lot more competitive. So with those schools, you have to just be realistic that from some point you have maybe a 30% to a 50% chance of getting in a lot of times, unless you're able to really kind of up yourself into what the criteria is. So as you are going through on the applications, you're going to have to think about and be realistic, particularly as an international student, because again, you're coming in with sort of an extra layer of having to apply, of whether or not you're stacking up against the criteria and saying, realistically, can I get in here? Can I even try? Is it worth a shot? Now, let's say you are someone that you have, again, outstanding grades, you have all these extracurriculars, you've done all these great things, but with the SAT, ACT, your score is just at the bottom. You have to keep in mind that there are going to be a lot of students who are at the top and they may get more priority for you. So you're thinking about that in terms of your reach school, you really want to try it, or dream school, you want to find a way to just be more realistic with it. And that's why we always say that you want to have these different rankings so that you go through and you be as realistic as possible. It doesn't mean that you're not going to still apply for your reach or dream school. Definitely apply for your target schools too. But you want to have a balance as you're going through and applying, because if you really, if the goal is to go to college or university, you want to have some place to go. You want to make sure that any college or university that's on this list is something that you can, at the bare minimum, tolerate. So maybe, XYZ, a private college is not your first choice, but it was a safety option. And maybe you have the potential to up yourself, get better grades, and then transfer to the dream school maybe after 2 years. A lot of people do that. So don't feel intimidated, but I just wanted to let you know about these different rankings, that this is something that millions of us have used in the past, and it still works in terms of students being able to sort of figure out and go through and parse out the different colleges and try and put them into these buckets to decide which ones they want to apply to, why they want to apply to them, and what they're going to need to do. So as an international student, definitely go through and do that as you're starting to think about, again, who you are, where you want to be, what programs you want to do, and where you want to go here in the US. So a lot of students ask me, I know that for people who do this all the time in terms of college consulting specifically, they'll ask, how many schools should I apply to? So again, as we were thinking about the fact that the U.S. has, nearly 4,000, it's 4,000 plus colleges. Some of them are included like beauty schools and things like that. But for the ones that are granting degrees, there's nearly 3,500. And so you just have to think about the fact that there's so many options. But the magic number, even though this is not a magic number, you can apply to as many as you want. But sort of the sweet spot for students is going to be about 9 colleges and universities to apply for. And I know that seems like a lot. It can be a lot. We're going to be later on talking about applications and common application and school-related applications and how all of that works, coalition applications. We're going to talk about all of that in a future video. But I definitely just want to say that it doesn't always have to be balanced either. So if you're thinking, well, okay, if 9 is the magic number and 9 is sort of the number I should be targeting, that means 3 in each section, right, to make 9. Not necessarily. You could have, let's say, 2 safety schools. You could have 3 target schools, and then the rest could be dream schools. It doesn't have to be like that. You can mix and match however you want. And again, it doesn't have to be 9. But we have found just through research and over time, particularly for the Zoomers and Gen Zers, that they are not kind of as wild and crazy, shockingly, as people older than them, even millennials, where it's like, I mean, I applied to lots of schools here. I got into most of them. And I did the same thing for grad school. I told you that I applied to nearly 25 schools in the UK. But I think that like with us, it was just I mean, it was a different time. And, I mean, I don't want to make that excuse, but I'm just saying I think that a lot of wisdom has been put into a lot of students now where they're like, I need to just be a little bit more realistic. Like college is not getting any cheaper. So let me figure out what I can do here. So 9 is sort of that sweet spot. A lot of students will even take it up to 12 just to be a little bit safe. So they have a few more in their safety school bucket. They have a few in their target school, and then they really go after the reach schools. But there's no perfect number in the end. So if you decide that you want to go sort of full court blitz and you're like, I'm going for 40 colleges and universities in the US, you want to start early because that's going to be a lot of applications, a lot of recommendations, and a lot of essays. But if you want to do that, then go for it. That just gives you more opportunity, just keeping in mind that you don't want to spread yourself too thin. So you have to just remember that this is not sort of something that you can just do in a day. Like this is not something you just wake up one Sunday and you're like, yeah, I think I want to apply to these different colleges. Like it takes time to be able to do that. And so you just want to keep that in mind as you're going through and doing your research. But I definitely want to share that with you as some wisdom for what you can use as you begin to figure out where you want to go. And again, hopefully you're using the quick look list, but also too, as you're doing your own research and deciding that, yes, like it's going to be great to potentially apply for some of those Ivy League schools and for some of the more name brand schools like a UC Berkeley or something. But then look at some of the other schools that you may have never even heard of that have international student opportunities, and that may be great for you in the end. And so as we wrap up D6, I know that it can feel very overwhelming to begin putting everything into a formula and trying to decide, where should I apply? What should I do? Where do I even begin? Do I want to do this? I would say that you probably do want to do this if you are this far in this series. But I will just say that even though it feels very overwhelming, just know that there are millions of us who have gone through this, and there are so many students who are probably going through this right now. So you are not alone in this. And I know that as an international student, it can feel even more overwhelming, which is why I put together this series. I want you to have all the information you need to have at least jumpstart on beginning to apply for colleges and universities here in the US. I will see you tomorrow for day 7, where we're going to talk a bit more in detail about applications and what you may see within the application process, specifically as you apply to American colleges and universities. I'll see you tomorrow for day 7.